Anaerobic exercise is when the athlete's performance isn't intense enough to result in a lactate production. So an example of an anaerobic activity could be a 100-meter sprint, as although an athlete would have to work for a very high intensity, it is also a very short duration. An example would be Shelly-Ann Fraser, who won gold in the 100 meters at both the 2008 and 2012 Summer Olympic Games. The race, due to its short, explosive nature, requires a high level of power to have a clean and powerful start off the starting blocks, as this is crucial to the success of an athlete in this race. So, power can be defined as the ability to produce force quickly, in which is a crucial aspect of a sprinting performance. Previously mentioned, it allows the athlete to get out of the blocks quickly and powerfully through the acceleration phase in order to reach the maximum speed as quickly as possible. In addition to this, speed is also a crucial aspect in determining the success of a 100-meter sprinter, so in this case Shelly-Ann Fraser. An appropriate training method for an athlete that acquires this ability could be interval training, as interval training incorporates alternating periods of low and high intensity. By repeating this activity, it will support the athlete in reaching optimal success due to the intense nature of the training method. Shelly-Ann Fraser will have high ATP/PC stores. This allows her to work at her maximum ability for longer periods of time and can continue at her maximum ability for the duration of the sprint. In comparison to someone like Mo Farah, who mostly races over long distance like 5,000 or 10,000 meters, which in turn requires power, which, similar to Shelly-Ann Fraser, is important for Mo Farah in his event to combine his speed and his strength to help him maintain a good speed. His legs need to be pumping. It also allows him to overtake his opponents towards the end of the race. Additionally, cardiovascular fitness is theoretically the most vital aspect of his components of fitness. Cardiovascular endurance will allow him to keep going the whole distance of the race without tiring, allow him to beat or keep up with his opposition. Lastly, muscular endurance, because athletes like Mo Farah in his event, because it allows his body and muscles to work for long periods of time without tiring. Suitable training methods for a long-distance runner would be something that focuses on cardiovascular fitness, as cardiovascular endurance is probably the most essential aspect in determining the success, so continuous running would be very beneficial for an athlete similar to Mo Farah. By increasing the intensity and duration of the training method over a period of time will gradually increase his ability. For example, over 6 weeks, increase the distance 400 meters each time the training method is completed. So both of these sports require different demands on the body. So aerobic training methods. An example of aerobic training methods could be continuous training or interval training or fartlek training. An example of continuous training could be a 4-mile jog for a continuous steady pace. Continuous training can be very simple to adapt. You can increase the distance of the run each week, how fast you aim to complete the run, or even how many times you do the run each week. Interval training is the most commonly recognized as anaerobic training. However, it can be adapted to suit aerobic sports. So, for example, Mo Farah. This can be done by increasing the repetitions and decreasing the speed of the sprint, so you are no longer working at your maximal effort. Maximal training would be if the athlete was to sprint at 100% effort. However, if the athlete was to run at 80% effort, it would be more effective for a longer distance athlete. Fartlek training is very effective for team sports, so for example, football. Similarly, fartlek training can be adapted to be made more intense, so you could extend the periods of jogging and sprinting and decrease the walking time. You could also increase the amount of times you train each week. So, anaerobic training methods. Interval training and fartlek training and HIIT training can all be used as anaerobic training methods, in addition to aerobic training methods. Fartlek training can be modified by increasing the distance the athlete has to sprint, shortening the jog and increasing the walk. This would allow the body to recover, similar to a 100-meter sprinter like Shelly-Ann Fraser, as this distance as anaerobic. Interval training is also very effective for a sprinter, as it resembles the race, as during interval training, commonly the athlete will run at maximal intensity, for example 30 to 40 meters, and then walk back. However, it can be any distance that doesn't require the aerobic system. HIIT training is a form of interval training, an exercise strategy alternating short periods of intense anaerobic exercise with less intense recovery periods. This is where you basically work as hard as you can. These sessions can be completed as many times a week as the athlete wants, as they really don't take very long at all. They can be completed in 15 minutes or even quicker if you work at an even harder intensity. So this graph shows VO2 max data. Pre-test VO2 max is normally around 45 to 50. The post-training max is around 45, maybe 50, 55. The cardiovascular system can be linked to an athlete's aerobic performance. The line below shows an athlete that has done training, so basically it shows a trained athlete will be in the position to keep their VO2 max at a lower level in comparison to an athlete that hasn't been training. The trained athlete is a lot more efficient as they can use less oxygen while still working for a long duration and harder intensity in comparison to someone that hasn't trained. As an athlete trains, their cardiovascular system will adapt. This is important especially for long duration activities, so for example Mo Farah during training for a 5,000 metre race, because it is important he receives the blood needed to carry on at such a high intensity. During this training, an athlete's cardiac output will increase, therefore a bigger EDV, which is all linked in Starling's law. Therefore, a lower stroke volume at rest. Cardiac hypertrophy is the thickening of the myocardium. Like any other muscle which increases during exercise, the heart chambers also increase in size. Cardiac hypertrophy can be increased by intense training, prolonged endurance and strength training. These can all cause the heart to adapt to handle the extra workload. For example, an athlete that will need a stronger heart is Mo Farah. Mo Farah's heart is stronger than, for example, a sprinter, as more blood will be pumped around the body and more oxygen will diffuse into the working muscles, so he will be able to run at a high intensity for a much longer duration than, for example, a sprinter. A stronger heart would ultimately decrease resting heart rate because the heart is pumping more blood around the body in one beat. This causes more oxygen to reach the working muscles whilst he's running. Cardiac hypertrophy is one of the long-term effects of exercise on the cardiovascular system and is an adaptive response to pressure. As you exercise regularly, we begin to adapt and cope more efficiently with the strain placed upon our bodies. As a result, we can exercise for longer periods of time. The most common causes of cardiac hypertrophy are related to increased blood pressure in either lungs or the body. The extra work of pumping blood against increased pressure causes particularly the left ventricle to thicken over time, the same way a body muscle increases in mass in response to, for example, weightlifting. Ultimately, it increases the strength of each contraction, causing more blood to be pumped within one contraction, so increased stroke volume, which is the volume of blood from the heart with each beat, and the heart being capable of increasing filling during the diastolic, which is the resting phase, and increasing the strength of contractions during the systolic phase. This can otherwise be known as athlete's heart. Athletes due to the intense training would have a much lower heart rate in comparison to an average individual that hasn't done much training. The fitter performer, the more oxygen available for the working muscles, rather than going to their heart. This is why the slower the heart is beneficial to a performer. Long-term exercise would also increase the blood plasma. A typical athlete has a greater amount of red blood cells than an individual who does not exercise regularly. Additional red blood cells positively affects athletes as it enhances the transportation of oxygen to working muscles during exercise and increases your blood volume, meaning more blood transportation to the muscles, allowing the athlete to perform for longer. So, for example, Mo Farah's resting heart rate would be lower than Shelly-Ann Fraser, as he is more adapted to longer periods of exercise rather than short, explosive movements. Long-term exercise can also lead to the expansion of the capillary network as a result of anaerobic exercise by 5 to 20% if you exercise regularly, for the reason being there would be an increase in blood flow, providing more efficient oxygen and nutrients. This is known as capillarization. This is a graph of a VO2 max heart rate. As you can see that the lighter blue line is the trained athlete. This is visible because the trained athlete's heart rate started lower, indicating a lower resting heart rate due to intense training, as the heart doesn't have to work as hard due to the cardiovascular adaptations. For example, cardiac hypertrophy would have occurred, increasing the heart chambers in size and causing more powerful contractions, so the heart doesn't have to work as hard to pump more blood to the working muscles. The untrained athlete is the dark blue line. It shows the athlete cannot participate in activity for as long as the trained athlete.